Don't we have a great worship team? We are so blessed um, by these guys, and we're blessed every week. And they put in a lot of hours uh, every week, not only to make the music sound good, but to prepare their hearts and to prepare this room for us to enter into worship. So I'm just really grateful. We're really blessed in this church by the team we have and what everyone puts into that. So we have been talking, Pastor Gene and Pastor Eric have been talking about the spiritual practices and disciplines that we can put into our things we can do in our daily lives that are designed to bring us closer to God. So we've been talking about this for a lot of the summer. These practices, we all have practices or habits, right? There's a lot of words you can use for that. We all have things that we do on a regular basis, right? I tend to make a cup of coffee, I make a cup of coffee and I drink it every morning, right? I check email on my phone, probably too often, right? We all have things that we do on a regular basis. Some of them are good, some of them, we could probably do without. But these are things that we can integrate into our lives daily and weekly and monthly that are designed to help us live the life that God intended us to live, right? So that's what we're talking about. Even better than coffee. So today's topic is silence and solitude. And Pastor Gene is in Florida with his grandkids this week, so he asked me to talk about it, and very, very grateful for the chance to talk about it. Very relieved too, because I figure, we've got 30 minutes. We can spend at least half of that, 20 minutes, just practicing, right? Like, practice is a good way to learn, just silence. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that. Some of you were like, and then there's some parents of small kids that are like, yes, sign me up. Let's go. No. So we're going to talk about silence and solitude. And I want to share a little bit about my own journey and my own introduction to this, because I didn't grow up with this concept. This was new to me when it was first introduced a few years ago. So a little bit about me. My parents are missionaries. They joined the missions organization right out of college, and they are still with that organization. So my whole life I grew up as a missionary kid. I grew up in part of the time in South America and in Africa. We traveled a lot, lived internationally a lot. And like anything, there were pros and cons to growing up that way, but there are a lot of really cool things, right? Like getting to meet Christians, getting to meet believers all over the world who were on fire for Jesus, loved Jesus, and were doing amazing things in some really hard places, right? Really doing a lot of good things in sharing God's love in a lot of really practical ways all over the world. So that was cool. My parents, they lived on support and on donations, so we got to see a lot of amazing stories of provision, both for our family as well as people we were around. So there were a lot of really cool things growing up that way. So I went to college, met my amazing wife, who's teaching another part of our congregation in the back there right now, some of the kids. And we moved to, when we first got married, we spent a couple years working with that same missions organization in Hawaii, where they have a big training center. Sacrificing as missionaries, okay, just clarify that. While we were there, when we first got there, we did a marriage small group. We were just married, and we did it with a few other couples that were recently married. And the couple that led this, they were a couple that we got to know. He had been a pastor in Montana and then in another part of Hawaii, and then he joined this organization. And they both had a real heart for staff development, helping people really connect in their walk with God, especially in the busyness, right? Like, it's very easy to get busy, and they wanted to help people really connect with God in the midst of that. So we got to know them. They became really good friends. And then we moved here to Michigan. I started working with a startup company, and my wife was working as a contractor at Dow. And around the same time, this other couple, they moved to Connecticut, and they continued to work as missionaries. And we stayed in touch, and we talked pretty often. And he started talking to me about, with this new group he was working with, they were doing started talking to me about silence and solitude retreats. and contemplative prayer and silent prayer and some of these things that they were doing in some of the programs. And I remember when he first started talking to me about some of this stuff, it sounded a little weird, right? Like I'd grown up as a Christian, but like some of the first things that came to mind were like monks off in a cave or like hippies up on a mountain or something. Like that was my first thoughts. Like it just didn't sound like, it wasn't something, we'd grown up, I don't know, when I was younger, we talked about quiet time, spending time with God, but this just sounded different. It sounded, it was not something I was used to. Well, he talked to me about it, and I was intrigued by what he was saying. So our oldest, who's almost 13 now, when he was about a year old, so my wife had quit her job to stay home with him. When he was about a year old, my startup company, we lost our biggest contract. And there was a process over several months. We thought it was going to get renewed, and it wasn't. And so all of a sudden, our little startup was not starting up. And so we were kind of furloughed off and on while we were sorting that out. And so it was just a really kind of challenging time. It was a really uncomfortable time. We didn't really know a lot of people here. We'd gotten connected to this church. We didn't have family here. So all of a sudden we were here in this place. We'd moved here. All of a sudden I had a kid to take care of, all these things. And so I had all these insecurities and fears and all these things that I was dealing with. And I am a master at avoiding unpleasant emotions and just distracting and thinking about other things. But I was challenged by my friend to just go and try this silence and solitude. So literally all I would do is I would go, and we lived in a little 2-bedroom duplex, and I would just sit in our bedroom and I would just sit in silence and just come before God. And what would happen was all those emotions would come up. All the fear and all the insecurity, and I would just sit there through that and just not say anything, just ask God to come into that and bring all those to God. And I just so clearly remember that time. I mean, it was uncomfortable, it was a difficult time, but at the same time, as I sat with God over and over again, what he would speak to me was, don't be afraid. Like that was the message over and over. It was just, don't be afraid. And I was very afraid. But I kept going back to him, and that's what he kept saying. And through that time, some amazing things happened. We had someone that we knew had bought a cow, and they had some extra meat they didn't think they would use. They just showed up at our door one day with a bunch of extra meat. It's out of the blue. And, we had lots of stories, just little things that happened all throughout that time. And, when we were missionaries, right, we'd write support letters like you see, but I was working a job, right? So, our family knew, and maybe a few close friends, some of our family, but people didn't know. But we were able to get through that time. And then eventually my company got another contract, and we went back to full time, and everything was good. So through that time, first of all, we signed up for a class on budgeting and saving and finance. So that's a good thing. You gotta take care of that stuff too. But I also learned through that, having grown up as a missionary and now the first time being in a normal job, I saw how God used that to teach me that he was still going to provide, and he was still going to take care of us no matter what, no matter what setting I was in. And if I hadn't have taken that time, if I just tried to get busy and avoid the uncomfortable feelings, just try to work and fix it, I don't know that I would have learned that lesson. But just by taking that time, and it's not like it was a lot of time, it's not like I did this every day, but just taking that little time to be with God and to listen to him, it allowed me to learn that and to grow in that. So that was my introduction to silence and solitude. And I would love to say that I've just done that perfectly ever since. But it's still, even this week, reviewing this, it's a constant reminder. So I want to just talk about some definitions as we go into this, because sometimes these words, when you first hear them, like I said, it sounded weird to me. It could sound weird to us, like almost sound like a punishment, right? Like be quiet and go to your room, right? Like this, or like if you're already in jail, it's like, and you do something wrong, it's solitary confinement, right? Like these are not always seen positively. So, but these are practices that have been around. I mean, we'll look in a minute. It's in the Bible. It's been around in church history just for as long as there's been church history. But when we talk about these, if we want to show, when we talk about silence and solitude, what we mean by this, by silence, is not just being alone, by solitude. So solitude, not just being alone, but it means being alone with God. right? So this is not just about, again, it's not like some Buddhist thing where you're just trying to, or some mindfulness thing. It's really about just being alone with God and getting away from other distractions so we can be with God. And similarly, silence doesn't just mean a lack of noise or quiet, but it means being in a place of listening to God. Pastor Gene talked a couple weeks ago about contemplation, right? Putting our attention on God. So it's related to that, being in a place where our focus is on God and we're listening to God. And in one way, it sounds kind of simple, right? Just make space for him and listen. And it is. Like, that's all it is. There's not more to it than that. But it's also pretty hard, right? Simple, but it's hard. And we live in a time where it's hard to get alone and listen. And in some ways, this has always been a challenge, right? So Jesus talks about, in the parable of the sower, he talks about the cares and worries and pleasures, riches of the world that distract us from the word, right? So, those have always been around. That's not new to us. But we do live in a time where society, everything around us is just extra noisy, extra busy, extra hurried, right? Like everything is rushed. Everything is, have you ever had to sit through like the same red light twice on Eastman, right? You're just like, come on, we're so spoiled in Midland, right? Like little town problems. But we're rushed. We're always rushed, right? If your drive-through takes too long, you're like, come on, always in a rush. And there's so many things that are trying to suck our time and attention, right? And this is not surprising or new to any of us. I'm sure most of us have heard some of these statistics, like, we spend almost 7 hours a day on screens on average, and that's actually lower than the global average. So worldwide, a lot of places, they spend even more time than that. I just remember, I'm a soccer, I like all sports, but soccer's my favorite. When I was a kid, on ESPN2, once a week, they would show a European soccer game. And now you can, there's these shows where, they have every game on, and it's cycles between wherever they're scoring a goal, Or I just learned there's a one for baseball now where they have 4 games at the same time. And the audio commentary, it's just you can watch all the sports all the time now. So whatever it is, there's just so many distractions, so much input in our lives. So, there's a lot of ways to talk about this. This one stuck out to me. This story stuck out to me. You'll have to bear with me on this one a little bit. The largest natural resource company in the world is Saudi Aramco, which is the Saudi oil company. All right? Probably didn't have that on your Sunday morning bingo card, right? Saudi Aramco. They have 267 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, right? So that's what they've proven, right? They're finding more all the time. So that 267 billion barrels, that's enough to power the United States for the next third of a century, right? So that's a lot of oil. It's worth about $17 trillion at today's prices, more than the economy of China, right? So they're the richest natural resource company in the world. They're, as of Monday, when I checked, their market cap, so the value of their company, according to investors, is $1.6 trillion, which is 3 times more than the economy of Michigan, right? So this is a huge, huge global company. They are the 7th largest company in the world. The 6th largest is Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp. So Facebook, basically. Facebook's market cap is 1.8 million. So 10% more than Saudi Aramco, right? So you've got a company that owns 267 billion barrels of oil and a company that has what? So what does Facebook have? It has our attention. It's got our attention, right? So half the world logs on to a Meta site at least once a month, half the world's population. And in the US, the average American spends over an hour a day, every day, on one of their websites, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp. And that's just average, right? So, there's some that are on a lot more. So our attention is worth more than the biggest natural resource company in the world, right? You're better off having people's attention than you are having all the gold, oil, whatever. Companies know this. Companies know, the world's economy knows, our attention is the most important resource. The enemy knows this, right? You know, Pastor Gene often talks about how we're in a battle. The enemy knows how important our attention is. It's how we're designed. It's what God designed us for. Is our attention is the most valuable thing we have. And so, of course, it shouldn't be surprising that it sounds weird to talk about silence and solitude, right? Because at one level, the largest, and so the other companies, right, that are the biggest companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, they're all in that space, and the chip companies that power those companies, right? So that's by far, these are the largest companies in the history of the world. That's what's powering them, and they don't want you having silence and solitude. They want your attention. It's worth a lot. Right? So no wonder it seems hard sometimes or crazy to talk about silence and solitude. Our whole economy is pointed at capturing our attention. They don't want you listening to God. They want you listening to whatever dance video, whatever they've got going on today. So let's take a moment. That's how the world views our attention. So let's just take a moment and look at what the Bible has to say about this, because the Bible says a lot about it. And it starts in Genesis, right? So God, after he creates the world, and Adam and Eve sin, and the first thing that happens after they sin is they hide, right? They make the fig leaves and they hide. And then the first thing it says about God in Genesis 3:9, it says, the Lord called to the man and said, where are you? So that's God's first reaction after sin. So it's not, what have you done and why did you do that? The first thing he says is, where are you? Because what sin did is it made us hide from God. So instead of going to God as we were able to do before sin, we're hiding behind our little fig leaves. And the first thing God says is, where are you, right? Like, can't you see that? Like, we had this relationship with God, and God's first reaction to sin is, where are you? Why is this gone? So it's the loss of relationship. And so all throughout the Bible, you see where God's trying to get people's attention and bring them out of the world and be able to connect with them. And so, we could spend a long time on this, but it is Bagel Sunday, so we'll just give a couple examples. So Exodus 3 is the story of the burning bush. We won't go through the whole story, but probably a lot of you know this. Moses is out in the wilderness with the sheep up on this mountain, and he comes across the burning bush, and that's where God speaks to him about taking the Israelites out of Egypt. So God's meeting with Moses in a quiet place. He's away from everything else. He's up on this mountain. There's no one else around. God has his full attention. He's able to speak to him in that place. And actually, even the whole Exodus story is interesting, right? Because God's taking the people of Israel that are busy. They're working as slaves. They don't have any time. And the first thing he does is he takes them out into the wilderness, right? And they spend it wasn't supposed to be 40 years. It's supposed to be less. But he takes them out into the wilderness so he can speak to them and tell them who he created them to be, not to be slaves, but to be his people, right? So even with the whole nation, God's trying to do that. Just get them out of the busyness so he can speak to them. Fast forward, David, David writes a lot of the Psalms, and you can see all through David's life and his writings of the Psalms, so many examples of where he captures this. So Psalm 42, as the deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. I thirst for God, the living God. When can I go and stand before him, right? He just wants to be with God. You can almost see him responding to like God's call, like, where are you? And David's saying, I'm coming. I want to be there. That's where I want to be, and he had a lot of things going on in his life, a lot of challenges. He just wants to go and be with God. Again, Psalm 27, one thing I ask of the Lord, this is the thing I seek the most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's protections and meditating in his temple. Right? And he was the king. I don't know when he wrote this, but at some point, right, he's living in the palace, right? He's living in the best house. But he's saying, I want to live in God's house. Like that's where my heart is. I want to be with God. Isaiah 55:3, God's talking to Israel through Isaiah, and he says, come to me with your ears wide open. Listen and you will find life. So if you look at that whole passage, he's talking about all the things the world has to offer, how they don't really satisfy. But he's saying, come to me and listen. And in his words, we find life. Daniel 6:10, a lot of you know this story. Daniel, he was a busy government official, but he would go 3 times a day and kneel down in his room and pray to God. So, and then they passed a law to make this illegal, and he still did it. And that's why he got thrown to the lion. So just a couple of examples, but you can look all the way through where people were God's always trying to get his people to come out and to be with him and to listen to him. And you see people responding to that throughout the Bible. So now we get to the life of Jesus. And, he's our ultimate example. And there's 9 different times where the Gospels talk about Jesus getting away to a quiet place in the life of Jesus. And one of those is Luke 15, where it says Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed, right? So it's not like he did it 9 times. He did it a lot. It just talks about it 9 times. And, like in this verse, it says, news was spreading fast. Crowds of people were coming, but Jesus withdrew. So a lot of people coming. And then the disciples, in this story, the disciples come and they're like, everyone's looking for you, right? And you can almost hear like the PR guy being like, now's the time, you're trending, let's go. But Jesus takes time away. And actually in this one, he says, when the disciples come to him, he says, no, let's go to the other villages because that's why I've come. So he wasn't just being driven by what was happening. He was listening to his Father. He was listening to God. And that's, he says that he always did what the Father told him. And how did he know? Because he was taking the time to be with his Father and to listen. So some of the times when Jesus took time away, like I said, there's different examples. So one of them was at the start of his ministry when he takes 40 days of prayer and fasting in the wilderness. And I'll just say the word apparently means like a quiet or remote place. So sometimes it's translated wilderness, sometimes it's called solitary place. The point is he's getting away. Somewhere quiet. So he starts off his ministry with 40 days of prayer and fasting, and at the end of the time, he's tempted by the enemy. And I used to think of this as I grew up thinking of this as like, he's fasting for 40 days, so he's really weak, and that's when the enemy comes, and it's kind of like God identifying with our weaknesses. He's putting himself in a place of weakness, so when Satan tempts him, he has to deal with it in weakness. And I was challenged by this recently. Someone was saying, like Pastor Gene said, we're in a battle, right? God knows that. Jesus knows that. He knows this confrontation's coming. Is he putting himself in a position of weakness? Or is he actually putting himself in a position of strength? So is this 40 days of prayer and fasting actually Jesus' way of preparing so that spiritually he's in the strongest possible position to face that temptation from the enemy? So it's an interesting question. There are times before key moments in his ministry where Jesus goes away. So like before the feeding of the 5,000 and before the Sermon on the Mount, like when he was preparing for big moments. There's times that Jesus gets away after big moments, right? So after the feeding of the 5,000, he goes away, right? Because sometimes after, a big experience or a big victory, like it can, there can be a lot of emotions and things to deal with. And so in both cases, he's getting away. When his cousin John the Baptist dies, he's dealing with that sadness and that challenging moment. He gets away to be with Jesus. And then right before he's crucified in Mark 14, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's with his disciples, but in the end, he goes away by himself to pray right before that. So preparing for, the hardest test, and the biggest moment of his ministry, he takes time away. So all throughout his life, Jesus is taking time out of all the busyness, which he had a lot of. And, all his busyness was good, right? Like some of my busyness is not good. All of Jesus' busyness was good. Like he was healing people, he was doing good stuff, but he's still getting away. Like that was still important to him. And sometimes he got interrupted and he responded with compassion and healed people, but that was just a priority for him. So if it worked for Jesus, it might be good for us, right? Like we might need it too. Like, nah, I got it. Yes. Jesus needed it, but no, we need it too, right? Like that's the example we've been given. So a couple quotes here. Again, you can look all throughout church history. This has always been a big part. Henry Nouwen, who's a well-known Catholic writer, says, "Without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set aside time to be with God and listen to Him." And closer to home, theologically, John Wesley, right, who started the Methodist tradition that we're a part of, he said, "We have need daily to retire from the world, at least morning and evening, to converse with God, to commune more freely with our Father, which is in secret." So he's telling people, like, you should be doing this every day. In fact, in this quote, he goes on to say, like, longer times of being with God are good. Just make sure you're not doing it so much that you're, like, not taking care of your responsibilities, right? So he felt like he had the right to say, hey, don't take too much time away with God. Like, that's not something we often have to worry about now, right? So this has just been the attitude of Christians throughout history, as we need to be spending time with God. So I'm more of a big picture thinker. I like to think about concepts and big ideas. I know some people are like, okay, practical, all right? So thankfully, my friend Raj, who introduced me to this, he talks about 4 steps to start, right? So if you want to just start, if this is not, I know for a lot of you this is already part of your life, but if this is not part of your life, there's 4 steps to start. And the great thing is we can start small with this, right? We don't have to start big. The first thing he says is just find a time. Just set a time. Put it on the schedule. It can be a few minutes in the morning. It can be an hour once or twice a week. Maybe once a month or once every 3 months. You take a longer time, a morning or longer. The important thing is to pick a time and then pick a place, right? Find some place where you're not going to be interrupted, right? It could be a room in your house. It could be in your backyard. We've got some, Chippewa Nature Center, City Forest, right? If you can, be outdoors, there's places you can go that aren't far where you can be quiet. For some of you, it might mean having to wake up extra early before all the other noise wakes up. So find a time and find a place, and then surrender that time to God. So when you get to that place, just give that time to God and just say, God, I'm here for you. And there's some tools to do that, but at the basic level, that's what you're doing. It's kind of like fasting, where you're giving up food. We're just giving up social interactions, right, for that time, so we can focus on God. And then we're seeing what God does with the time that we give Him. And the last step is to just spend time listening, right? And from a relationship, right? Sometimes, when you're with someone, especially someone that you know very well, sometimes that time there's a lot to talk about. And sometimes it just means being together, being quiet together. And, really being together in silence, it's almost like the closer you are to someone, the easier that is, right? Like it's weird to just, sit next to a stranger for a long time quietly, or someone you don't know very well. But with your spouse or dad with a baby, right? Like you just sit together, and there's something. Sorry, I'm calling you out there. Like with kids, right? Like if your kid climbs up on your lap, they can just sit with you, and sometimes that's all it takes, is just to sit together. So we don't bring necessarily expectations into that time, other than the expectation that God wants to be with us, and He just wants to be with us and get us away from the busyness. And if you're like me, as soon as you take that time, there's a ton of distractions that come in, right? There's a ton of thoughts. We've got to-do lists, we've got emotions, we've got all kinds of stuff. And, my friend Raj always gives a quote, roughly that, 1,000 distractions when you come to pray are 1,000 opportunities to go back to God. And just bring those to God and just keep going back to Him. And so not to be discouraged by that, not to be put off by that. I mean, that for many people, that's why we stay away, right? Because we're not ready for all those thoughts and all those feelings to come back. But God wants us to take all of those to Him. And He is faithful when we do. So, when I was in college, just before I even had all these concepts, I remember there was a semester where I hadn't been spending a lot of time with God, and I had like an hour in my schedule, like once a week. And I remember just going in this stairwell in the theater building that no one was using at that time, And just for like an hour, I would just sit with God. And I just remember, like, it's not like it was, every single day. It was a great time. But, I just remember over the course of that semester, I just like it sticks with me, just like the closeness with God, just by taking 1 hour a week, right? And, like, God's so gracious, right? Like he's worth all our time, lots more than an hour a week. But he's like the father from the prodigal son story, right? Like we just start walking towards him and he runs towards us. Any little bit that we step forward to be with him, he will respond to. So there is, if you want to try out more, on the church website, on the app, next to this sermon, there's a download. Again, this is from my friend Raj, who he allowed us to share this. It's just a little 2-page guide to what he calls centering prayer. So it's called centering prayer, contemplative prayer, listening prayer. Like, don't get put off by the name, but it's basically just like a more detailed how-to if you want to try this out. And again, just try it out. Remember, the goal is to get away and be with God. And so, if you're not getting some like huge revelation or something every time, like that's not the goal. The goal is just to go and be with God. So I encourage you to give that a try. So I want to leave us with one last thought here this morning. And this comes from looking at Matthew 13:44, which is one of my favorite passages. Kingdom of heaven is like a treasure that a man discovered in a field. In his excitement, he hid it again and sold everything he owned to get enough money to buy that field. So I love that passage. I love just the visual of it. I mean, you just picture a guy like stumbling across this treasure and then bearing it and running and like selling everything. And you can just kind of see like the people around him who don't exactly know what's going on being like, what are you doing? You're selling your house, But it's a good deal, right? Like he's making a good trade, right? Like someone who sold their house to buy Facebook stock way back in the day, like they came out really well. It was a really good deal, even if other people don't recognize it. So Facebook and Apple and ESPN and Pinterest and whatever, there's all kinds of things, right? They have a field to sell you, right? And they're telling you that it's worth your time, your attention, to get the thing that they have. But Jesus is the greater treasure, right? And man, I wish I was like telling you this, like I do a really good job with this all the time. But I'm still growing with this, and I still get caught up in all of those distractions. But Jesus is the much greater treasure, and so we can start small, but let's not just end small. Like let's move towards chasing after. Giving everything for him, because it's worth spending time with Jesus. So I started off in research in my job, and a few years ago I started doing a lot of sales too, just because small companies, so you end up doing different things, and had no background in that. So learning on the job. My grandpa was a small business owner. He started with 6 employees, ended up with a couple hundred. And he was a really good man, took really good care of his employees, just was he was a really good businessman. He was a really good salesman. And he passed away a little before I started in the sales job. And I've thought so many times, like, what I wouldn't give for like 1 hour, right, to sit with my grandpa and just listen to him and share what wisdom he had. And I'm sure all of you have people like that, right? Relatives, or maybe it's a hero or someone you just love. Like, man, how great would it be to just spend an hour with them? And like, imagine if you spend that hour and you just talk the whole time. You'd have to be like, oh, you want to listen and hear what they have to say. And, we have in God, we sometimes lose sight that he's like the king of the whole universe, And that's what we were singing about that earlier in the worship. He's the king of the whole universe. He is the wisest, smartest, most amazing being in history. And we have this invitation to spend not just an hour with him, right? But to learn from him. Like it says in Isaiah, learn from me and you will find life. I got to do a longer retreat like a 5-day retreat with my friend Raj in Montana. He ran these longer retreats, and if you would have told me this a few years ago, I'd have been like, well, that's crazy. But it was 5 days that he led. It was out in the wilderness. You had to take your bear spray with you because it's like grizzly country. There's like nobody there. And you can hear the wind blowing in the trees. Like that's the loudest noise around. And, it was challenging, right? Like it's hard. We're not used to spending that time alone. But it was amazing just to see over the course of those 5 days, like just how much God wants to speak to us if we'll just take the time to listen. He has so much that he wants to share. And so often we just don't listen. And so the last thing I want to say back to that Matthew verse is just to the reminder that ultimately there's actually only one, there's someone who has actually given everything up and sold everything in order to get the treasure. And the only person that's done that, the only one is Jesus, who gave everything up at the cross when he died for us so that we could be back in relationship with him. And that relationship that was broken with sin, we could come back to. And so whatever we're giving up, whatever sacrifice we're making, he's already made the greater sacrifice because he's the one that wants to be with us. So let's respond to him and let's take time with him. So that is my challenge to you today. So thank you for listening, and I'll go ahead with that and we'll pray together. Father, thank you for what you gave up just to be with us. Thank you for how much you want to be with us, how much you want to spend time with us, how much you want to share with us, how much you want to take our burdens and our dreams and the things you put on our heart, and how much you want to walk with us through all of that. And so I just pray, Lord, for all of us, Lord, that we would keep turning to you, that we would encourage one another, and that, no matter what, Lord, I just thank you that no matter what we've been through or where we've been, that you never stop calling us back to you, and you never stop welcoming us to come back to you. And so I just pray that you would help us to respond more and more to that invitation. If we've already responded, help us respond deeper and more. And if there's, those of us here who haven't responded to that, Lord, I just pray that you'd put on their hearts to make that first response to you and to that welcome that you give, that you extend to us, Lord. And help all of us to take hold of that treasure and take hold of that time with you and grow in that. And we just thank you, Lord, for the amazing God that you are. Amen. So enjoy the bagels, and hopefully you can meet someone from second service, and hope you can have some time to spend with Jesus in the coming weeks and months in a new way. Have a great Sunday. Thank you.